Hello, everyone, and welcome to part three of building our cookie clicker app. And this is the final part of writing all the code out and also like going over all the theory. And then today we're going to be going also over GitHub. And yeah, so I'll actually first start with GitHub and then I'll show you how to use it at the end. But after watching this video, and if you've watched the ones before, there are two parts before. It's in the YouTube playlist. It's also in Google Classroom. But if you've watched all of them and played around with it, I really recommend you guys to build something of your own. So after you watch this video, you can actually build something of your own. Go through the tutorials and build it while you watch them. You can make maybe some type of Pokemon clicker, some type of candy clicker, anything. Or you could like make something other than a clicker. You can make I don't know. There are so many possibilities. You can make something where there's an animation, or you can make um, anything that has a full stack component. So it has a front end, a back end, and a yeah, it has a front end and back end. Um, and anyway, so today I will be teaching you guys how to first I was going to teach you guys some GitHub. So essentially, if I just search up GitHub, right? GitHub, this is GitHub, and let me actually go to the website. So personally for me, I use GitHub every single day when I code because it essentially is necessary for me to track my progress in all my different projects. So as you can see here, I have like I have so many different projects, right? And I these each of these projects, if I go to this is one of my no, not this. If I go to one of my projects, one is Lola. So this is an app I'm building. It's an iOS app. And you can see here that I have messages here. Um, and I have different folders, right? So these are my folders in my coding project. I have different uh, code files. This is Swift. It's a programming language for iOS app development. But there's all these different files, right? And you can see messages here that describe what basically this GitHub change did. So I just want to tell you guys that GitHub is known as version control. So if I kind of write this out, so GitHub is like, so here we have GitHub, right? And then it is a platform for online version control, which means whenever you're coding something out and you want to kind of save it online, then you can you can create a GitHub. These are called repositories. So each of these are repositories. And you create a GitHub repository that kind of can hold all your code files and your current state of your code base. It's what it's called. So all your code files and all their folders and everything, it's called a code base. And you push your code base to this GitHub repository, which is held in storage on the cloud. And then you can essentially say that you mess up something on your in your code base, and then you want to pull a if you want to go back to a certain version from before, you can use GitHub to do that since it tracks all your changes. Okay. So for this project, I'm going to actually create a repository, and I can do that by new. So you'll have to create a GitHub account, and it's pretty easy to do that. But after you do that, you can create a repository. And you can also do that. Okay. And we'll name this repository, we'll name it cookie clicker. We'd say this is the GitHub for cookie clicker. All right. And then we can make it public or private. I'll make it public for now to just like show you guys maybe. And then a README file. This is basically like a file that describes what your app does, but we'll just skip all of this and create the repository. So after we create a repository, we have all this crazy, like, if you're like a beginner, you do not want to see this. Like, this is crazy. But it's pretty simple. All you really need to do is like have this link. So now that you guys created a repository, I'll be teaching you guys how to like push your code into this repository, but I'll do this at the end after we're done coding. So just know that GitHub is an online version control that's held on the cloud that can store progress and store your code online, okay? So we'll be going back to that after we finish our app. But again, our goal to finish the app is to create this fully functional cookie clicker. And so far, in the last video, we went over server.py. So we went over making our back end of the app. And just to go over it one more time, we have this home. So I didn't teach this to you as yet. I'll do this right after I explain what the server.py file does. But we have a read function where we can read open.txt, which is our database that holds the number of cookies. We read that value in the read function. In the write function, we can write different values to this file. We can write new values to this file and change the contents of this file. In our click decorator, it's a post function, which means it updates and it changes values that are shown in the front end. And what the click function does is it assigns a variable current to the current read value of count.txt. In this case, it's 35. So current will be equal to 35. We increment that by 1 because we're clicking it, so we want to increase the cookies every time you click it. So now current is now 36. And then we write this new value of current, which is 36, into this count.txt file. So now this value will be 36 after you call click. And then you just return a string of the current value, which is 36. In the score function, in the score route or decorator, it just returns a string of your current count. So it just returns whatever's in count.txt as a string. Now I'll be going over this function. So this is the route for this is just slash, which means it's just the main landing page. Like there's nothing more specific after it. And intuitively, that's why we call this function home, because this is our home function. This is what we will show on the home page. And if we go back to our website, this is the home page, okay? So, what we're doing in our homepage is we're doing this weird thing. So we're returning render template index.html. So that doesn't really make sense, right? Before, all we had to do is create HTML file and just like run it either through the terminal or hitting like go live on VS Code. But in here, we're doing this thing. And this brings me to teaching you guys about folders, files, and the proper structure, the file structure that you need in Flask apps. So before I go into that, I'm going to draw this out for you guys. So we have in a Flask app, so Flask, I'll call that Flask. Please ignore my handwriting, but Flask. In a Flask app, we are having say that this is the cloud. Okay, so this is just online computers where you can basically hold things, like store things online instead of like storing it on your local computer, right? Okay, so we have the cloud, and when we created server.py, server.py was our Python backend, and we are actually storing this backend in the cloud, okay? And then this cloud connects to the user's laptops or whatever device they're using. So I'll do my best to create a laptop. Here's the keyboard. And then they're running our cookie clicker app, right? So, okay, I'm having a bit of fun like doing the art. But this is our cookie clicker app, and the users are so this is Sally, and she's these are her hands. Okay, they're just arrows, but she's going on this cookie clicker app through her laptop, and her laptop connects to so she's running the HTML and the front end code or the client side JavaScript code on her laptop through her browser. So she might be using Chrome or Firefox or Edge or any of the browsers. So the HTML is running in this, but it's also she needs a backend to store her cookie clicker count, right? So that's where it connects to this the cloud, and it connects to server.py, which is held in the cloud. And server.py is the one, and server.py is the one that is doing the logic to store the cookie clicker count in it's also in the count.txt file. So these two files consist of your backend, and there will be stored in the cloud when you actually deploy your app. And then yeah, so you can see kind of how this works, how this network works, how this is the backend and this is the front end. Okay, so now that's how the network works. And to just tell you guys, a Flask app needs a certain type of file structure. So what your file structure is, it's like what files are inside certain folders, okay? And folders are like the folders in your computer. So in a Flask app, you have your folder. You have your, like, this is kind of how we represent folders. That. And then if you go back to the code, you have your main directory. So your main directory is just inside Clicker app. So you have your Clicker app. I'll just abbreviate to CL app. This is your Clicker app main directory, main folder. Everything inside this is inside the Clicker app. And here, the first thing we have is Python it's server.py. So your server.py, your Python backend, is just in your main directory, okay? It's not consistent. It doesn't go inside like any special folders. It's just in your main directory. Cookie clicker app, whatever you name your main folder. But then we have specific things that need to go inside certain folders to make this Flask app work. We have first the static folder, and the static folder, so I'll actually write it. So let me actually erase. Is there an erase tool? I'm not sure if there's an erase tool, but okay. Yeah, there is. Okay, so we have this static folder, and I'll name, so static, and I'll have this symbol for being a folder, okay? This star. And in this static folder, there's going to be stuff inside this, and these are going to be the files inside the static folder, and it kind of forms a tree. Inside the static folder, we'll be holding our JavaScript file and our cookie clicker image, okay? So this will be holding app.js and our cookie image. And the reason it's under the static file is it's promising our Flask app that these actually don't update any values in the front end. Think about it. When we have app.js, static folder means that the code or whatever contents are in these files are not changing as the app runs. And that's kind of intuitive because the JavaScript file, it's not changing, right? The code is not changing. And your image, like, it's obviously not going to change, right? But then we have the templates file. And this contains your HTML. So it'll contain index.html. And it's essentially called a template because HTML files are they are like the base template drawing. So if you imagine a painting, then the index.html is like the sketch, right? It's what can be modified. So this is why it's called template, because the index.html file can be modified by not only the JS but also the Flask app. So this is how you have to put your folders in for Flask to work, and that's what I did here. I created a static folder, and you can create a folder like that, but I created a static folder, put my two files in here, and then I created a templates folder and put my index.html here, and then my server.py is just in the main Clicker app directory. And to render your HTML in your Flask app to show it to the browser, you just do return render template index.html. Okay, so now we know how to do this server.py file. And then it's time to move on to this app.js file. And this has quite a lot in it, and it's quite some new material, but a lot of it is pretty much the same thing that I taught you guys before. These two connector variables was in part 1, where I showed you guys you just get the element by ID in your HTML and you assign the connector to your app.js. So for example, button ID, so in your button, you have this ID, right? So you just set your connector const button using get element by ID, and you'll also do that for cookie cloud ID. But one change you have to make in your HTML file is you have to change the file path to your image, and also your JavaScript file, because now they're not in the same folder, they're in different folders. So you can access static and then chocolate chip cookie.jpg using this folder kind of syntax, where you have slashes that represent inside what folder, and then this is your file. So inside the static folder, inside that is your chocolate chip.jpg file, and then inside static is your app.js file. So you have to do that for this to work, or else it doesn't know where these files are. But after you do that, you go to your JavaScript file, and this is essentially what it's doing. So we know what these are. These are just the connectors to the button and also the cookie count text. Then we have these two functions. But before I go through that, let's look at this event listener. So I taught you guys what event listeners do before. They listen and they wait for the user to interact with this button, right? And then once they interact with that button, which is the cookie button, once they click it, they run this code. So click cookie, right? And then click cookie, that brings us to this function. So every time the user clicks, the event listener listens and then waits for them to click the button. And then once they do that, it calls this function, click cookie. And there's this keyword async. And I taught you guys if you came into like the physical lessons, but essentially what async does is, it's better to draw this out. So async is a keyword that you put before specific functions that might take a while to load. So essentially how this works is, well, I'll give an example. For example, if you're using fetching APIs, or if you're fetching, say, a ChatGPT API call. So for example, in your app, say that you have a chatbot feature and you're using the ChatGPT API for it, and you want to call a request to the ChatGPT API, and then you wait for ChatGPT to give you a response. It takes some time, right? So you use async for that, because the function will take some time for it to work, and it's not a specific time. It might be 1 second, it might be 50 seconds. So that's why it's important to use async, because when async happens, your app, it continues running. So that means async happens in the background. And what this means is, if you call the async function, then your app will still keep on loading. It won't just freeze. If it's not async, then your app will freeze and wait for the function to complete. That's why async is important, because you can run it in the background while your app still resumes. But we are calling this as an async function because whenever we use Flask apps, we always tie this to async. And that's because Flask, if we go back to this, your Flask app is in the cloud, right? It has a connection with the browser. But when the user actually clicks the button and interacts with the browser, it sends across the internet and it requests things from and changes things and access things in the cloud. It accesses things in your server.py. For example, when we hit click cookie, we're actually running in the front end, we're actually running this function, right? Click. And since it's in the back end, we have to make this connection that might take a decent amount of time for information to pass. That's why we're using async. Oh, where did async go? Wait. Okay. Yeah. Where did async go? That's crazy. Okay, async. Yeah, async's here. Okay. So async means that the connection or the request might take a decent amount of time or an X amount of time. And we have to do that because Flask runs in the cloud and it's not on the user's browser. So there's going to be information being passed through like the internet, right? So you have to use async. And now let me explain what this function really does for you to actually understand why it might take a while. So basically, whenever the user clicks the button, it runs this. So it sets a response equal to basically what this click function, this click route returns. So what this means is when we're hitting click, response will be equal to what this click route returns. As you can see, we have this /click. We also have /click here. And this brings up the connection. This sets up the connection between your JavaScript file and your Flask app. This specific route. These are called routes. And whenever you fetch a route like this, it connects with your server.py, okay? So we call the /click function, which is this one. So we do click. And we know that this updates the current value in your count.txt file. So every time you click, it runs this response equals, you have to say await is the keyword where it's kind of the same as async where it might take a while. So you just have to do await before like calls inside your function. Like async is like when you're declaring your function and you use await when you're doing calls like inside your function. And then, so this might take a while. This await means it might take a while. This fetch. So you then do fetch and then you do /click, which is just the route for the function. And then method equals method post. If you go back to this method is also equal to post, so it lines up. And it means that this is updating values that that will show in the front end. So you're updating the cookie count, which will tie back into the front end and change the cookie count in the front end, right? So you have to use post because of that, because you're changing values that will actually appear in the website to the user in the click function. So now your response, you got the value from /click, which is your new current count, right? You're returning this new current count after updating it and increasing it by 1. And then you are going to, so you have this response now. And then now you're going to set your score text, which is, you're going to set a score text variable equal to the text of this response. Okay, so the reason you have to do this for getting the text of the response is that the response is in this specific JSON object, and I highly recommend you guys to search that up because this will be way too long video to explain JSON. But essentially JSON is a type of like structure or type of file format, and you have to break it down into specific parts to access information from it. So that's why you have to do another await call, because it will take some time to actually extract the information from the JSON file. So your response is in the JSON format, and then your score text is actually the string of your updated cookie count. And then finally, you are updating text content, which is just count.text content. So remember, this is the text of the cookie clicker count before. So you're updating that text content to score text. So your new cookie clicker count. So hopefully you guys can understand what this click cookie function does. To go over one more time, you set this response variable to whatever your /click function responds with and in your Python file, and that responds with the new value of your cookie count. But and you're using post because you're actually changing. This is what lead to changes in the front end. And then after you do that, response it'll be in a JSON format, okay? And then after that, you want to extract the actual text from the JSON. So you do score text equals to await response.txt, which will extract the valuable information, which is just the string of the cookie count. And then finally, you are updating the count.text content to whatever string this current cookie count is. So that will actually lead to changes in your HTML from the JavaScript. Now, finally, now that we went through click cookie, we will go through load score. And load score is kind of intuitive. So it sets a response equal to /score. So the return value of /score, which will return your current cookie count. And then it'll extract the text from that. And then it'll just say your current count is just what score text is. So essentially what it does is whenever you load the app, this function runs because we're calling it here. So whenever you load the app, this function is called. And then it'll just go and look into your count.txt, read the value of it, and then from the /score function, and then set your cookie clicker count in the HTML to whatever value stored in your count.txt. So hopefully you guys can understand that. So essentially this function just loads the score that was held in your text file, and this function updates the cookie clicker count using server.py, using the click function in server.py. So JS is the gap. It's kind of the bridge between your HTML and your Python. So now that you guys can hopefully understand JavaScript, server.py, and your also the index.html and also the count database, it's time to let's just try our app first and see if it actually works. So I can run it you always run it using your Python file, and then you can see if this works. So let's actually start with 0. So how to do that? We can just set this value to 0, and then let's go back to the Chrome. So if we reload this will be 0, right? Every time we click, okay, cool, this is working now. Nice. This is very fun, right? Then let's reload. Oh, it actually saves. Our cookie clicker count actually saves. Let's actually exit out, and then let's run this code again. Let's see what happens. Again, our cookie clicker count saved, right? So that's how our cookie clicker count was stored. It's kind of a long process to do so, but yeah, you'd have to set up your entire backend in your database to store your cookie clicker count. And again, our count.txt is being updated too. Like, it's going to be the same as this. So now that we finished coding, let's actually. So now that we're done coding the JavaScript and the Python file, I'll be showing you how to add all of these changes to GitHub. So before we set up the GitHub repository, we created it. And now this is how you do it. So first you want to initialize your GitHub. So you do git init, which means you're just initializing the connection between GitHub and your terminal or your code. Then you have to do git remote add origin, and then you paste whatever link is in showing in GitHub. So this is the HTTP link to your GitHub. So you just remote add origin, paste it. Now you created a link between this code base and this GitHub. And now what you have to do is you have to add all your changes. So git add dot, which means you're adding all your changes and all your files to your GitHub. And then you want to also git commit. And to do this, you do git commit, then -m, and then your commit message. So this is whatever the changes you made. So you want to describe these changes so that you know what you do each time you commit. So for example, here I added a Python backend and a JS file for my full stack cookie clicker app, and then it'll commit it. And it is pretty beneficial to make your commit messages descriptive, as you can kind of go back to them in case you mess something up and want to go back to earlier versions of your code. Now, after you commit, you push everything to origin main, which means you're pushing all your changes to your repository. So origin main is just the it's the branch, but it's kind of just saying git push origin main means you're just pushing all your changes to the main branch or the main code space. So now if I reload, yeah, now if I reload, initially it's empty. Now it is all my code here. If you go to the static file, you can see like literally our text, our code is literally the same here. Like if we go back to our, it even shows the image probably. Yeah, it even shows our image. So this is how you set up and commit and push to your GitHub. And yeah, so that's the end of this video. We successfully created cookie clicker. Oh, I ended the server, so I can't really, here, I'll do this. Python3 server.py. Yeah, so now we created our cookie clicker app that has data persistence, and hopefully you guys enjoyed the advanced web dev series, and I really encourage you guys to watch these videos, code it yourself, and create something new. So yeah, thank you guys for watching, and see you next time.